Hello everyone and welcome to another tutorial. This is a how to draw a face tutorial. I am drawing the known famous global speaker for September Choir, and on this show I want to take you to how I was able to draw this hyper realistic face. I've already made a video where I show you how to draw a hyper realistic eye. That's why this video starts where I draw the nose. So basically right now I'm still sketching the proportions, how they have to look. I am using a grid to get the whole proportions, and then I start sketching out. I have to say that I use charcoal entirely, or most of the time I use charcoal to do my drawing. So if you're using graphite, it's almost similar, but I'm going to say where it differs. So right now this is a blending stamp. I love using blending stamps over just using the pencil directly, because a blending stamp is very soft and it gives you an already blended texture. So here I'm sketching just how the nose should look, and after all that I'll start using a brush. This is a thin brush. This is a very soft brush that I will use to do the shading of the tone. So how you build the tone is very important to know that you build the tone slowly from your lightest, you build it in layers, and then you shade from your darkest areas to the lightest areas. So right now what I was doing, you would say, when I was making the sketch, I was basically highlighting where the darker areas should be. So right now I'm just using the brush to give everything one uniform layer. And then from here, as I come back with the brush, I'm going to shade from the darkest areas to the lightest areas. This is a smaller brush. I'm dipping the brush in charcoal. So if you are using graphite, I would recommend blending a graphite stick, an 8B graphite stick, and then dipping your brush in the graphite and then using it to shade. So in this case, I just use the darkest the darkest charcoal stick, which I turned into powder, and then now I'm using it to dip my brush and then come back to shade. So I'm just focusing on finding the darker areas, and then from there I'll go to the lighter areas. When I shade, I think you can notice that I'm using circular motion instead of just shading in lines. So what I'm trying to do is create a uniform, consistent layer and not find that it's uneven. What you're looking for, you are looking for control. So it is easier to control when you're shading in circular motion than if you were shading, say you were making lines, if I would say. So here I was kinda experimenting, because I would say this is the first drawing that I've ever done which is this detailed. So what I did here, I made this one layer, consistent layer. It's very light, and then now I'm using an HB pencil to make all the details. So what I'm planning to do is, after I've made the details, I can come back and shade on top of the details. So doing this, I've noticed that when I come back, like doing this in very darker areas, when you come back and shading on top of the details, you lose all the details and you have to do the details again, which could take a long time. So I would say do this on lighter parts of the face. So this side, which I'm currently focusing on, is lighter than the other side. So making the details when I haven't built much layer of the tone will be very effective, because now I just have to come back with another layer of tone, and then from there I can continue like using a pencil eraser or a blending stamp to like get the details. So here I've noticed that when you are detailing a huge area, you can kind of get lost in the details and just lose the whole thing. So what I did here, I stopped the detailing and just zoomed it back, going back to doing and shading the tone. That's like the easiest you can achieve a realistic face, like shading your darker areas, which I'm currently doing right now. I'm going to shade the darker areas, and then I'm going to take a bigger brush and just fill everything out, and then go back to the details. So if you're watching this and you're kind of confused whether which to do you do the details first and then shade on top, I would say when you are still starting out, it's better that you focus on just making and getting the tone as correct as you can. It will be easier to make the details on top of the correct tone than it is to like start with the details and then come back like trying to get the tone. But if you have to do it, remember to do it on the lighter part of the face where light hits the most, and it's the lightest, which on this drawing it's this side, which is the lightest. So here I continue building the tone. You build the tone in layers and slowly and slowly making it darker until you get the kind of tone that you're looking for. It's very hard to know the tone you're looking for if you just chew a small portion of the face, I've noticed. So what works for me if you're facing such a challenge is getting a reference, drawing a reference. I would say a reference part first. In this case, it's the eye. The eye has the darkest part of the drawing, which is the pupil, which is very dark. And then I use that to it kind of tells you how much lighter a certain area should be or how much darker a certain area should be. This was an experimental drawing. So here, as I'm drawing the area, I tried to experiment if I would use the charcoal directly on paper and shade in lines as I'm doing right now, and then come back with the brush and shade on top and just see what's going to be more effective. As you can see later, I come back with a blending stamp and a brush to like add the tone, and then the areas which I've shaded with the charcoal pencil directly are the darkest parts of the drawing, which, to be honest, I would say it helps to get the proportions correctly, but it didn't really help me here to get to make those areas as dark as I wanted them to be. So I had to come back with the charcoal and use my fingers directly and push the charcoal on those darker areas just to make it darker than it is right now. But it really helped to get the correct proportions of the ear and not lose those proportions.
Got joy in chaos. I've got peace that makes no sense. So I won't be going under. I'm not held by my own strength. That I built my life in Jesus, and He's never let me down. He's faithful in every season. So why would He fail now? He won't. Oh, He won't. My God won't fail. He won't fail. He won't. Lena ngathi
So after all that, I started like making some details using the eraser, but still the ear is very, very dark, so there isn't much really happening here. But I was using the eraser to make those highlights that I felt like I needed them. in this show. So to be honest, I was showing that ear cause it's the darkest so that I could be able to feel the side of the face, which was really important to me more than the ear to be honest, because the ear is very dark. It kind of gave me the reference. It kind of made itself a reference point for that side of the face, which I said earlier that drawing your darker areas or shading your darker areas makes that part a reference for the surrounding areas, especially if they are lighter, just to tell how much tone you have to get into those areas. Now I want you to notice this, that when I start shading, because the part that I'm shading is darker and then the rest of the area is still pale and white looking, it seems to be dark right now, but as you continue adding more tone around it, you realize that it's not that dark as it should be. That's why it's important to have references when you're shading, like shading one area and using that area as a reference for the next area. And right now you can tell, as I start feeling the rest of the area, you can tell that that's not as dark as it should be. It should be darker than that. So I continue building the tone. I always use a bigger brush to fill the rest of the areas which I didn't shade, which are the lighter areas. It's very easy that way, and at this point I'm not even focused on the details. And if you can notice on the other side of the face, even though at the beginning I was doing all those details with the pencil, with the HB pencil, I cannot say it's that effective. It's not. I'm gonna come back and add the details later. So as I finish this drawing, if I were to start again or work on another drawing, I would just focus on the tone and forget about the detail until I'm sure that I've got the correct tone to work on, and then from there I can apply the details on top of the tone. So at this point, I didn't have the material. I didn't have the chunky bar charcoal. So I was using my charcoal pencil directly. It's not it's not the softest. This is a medium range of the charcoal. I was using it directly, and it wasn't doing a great job, to be honest. So at some point, I had to go and get the chunky charcoal to add the tone and make it darker.
Work it out. One thing I know, one thing I found. Oh, God will work it out.
I have to mention this, that if you are using graphite, the technique, because I'm using the brush technique. The technique is similar. You can grind the darkest graphite that you have, and then just use that graphite as and use that graphite to shade, and then you can use the rest of the pencils to apply the details. It's easier that way.
The sun sets free. Who is free indeed? I'm the child of God. Yes, I am. You and I are. Who the sun sets free.
So the video skips here to the part where I got the chunky bar charcoal. To be honest, I got bored to be recording the whole thing because the charcoal pencil that I was using wasn't giving me the dark, rich color that I was looking for. And as you can see with the chunky bar charcoal, that I am getting the dark, rich tone, and it's beautiful.
I'm a child of God. Yes, sir.
So at some point that ear looked as if it was dark, but now that I'm actually shading with the chunky bar charcoal, which is really dark, I'm starting to feel like it's not dark at all. I have to go back and add more tone on those areas. So if I had the chunky bar charcoal from the beginning, I would have used it as the medium for the whole drawing. And if you are using graphite, the graphite stick, the AP graphite stick, they have the similar effect. Just that I prefer charcoal over graphite. So what I did here, I was focusing on the background. Now I have to say this: if your background is going to be dark, which mine is, it's important to start with the dark area first and then shade the rest of the drawing, because the dark background gives you the reference of how the entire tone of the drawing should be.
Is heaven. It's heaven to me.
As you can see, as I'm shading with the dark charcoal, you can tell that the rest of the drawing is not as dark or as rich as it should be. So I'm going to go back to add the tone, which is really frustrating at this point because I've already started making a lot of details, and when I come back to add the tone, I'm going to lose most of those details. So it's very important to get your tone right, and even if you get it wrong, going back to shading again and again isn't really the worst thing that you can do. So since charcoal is a messy medium, so what I do is to achieve the dark tone and not mess up the whole drawing, I fix the drawing, and then I can go back to shading again. That was a fixative spray. So I had to go back and do the entire drawing and add more tone and make the drawing richer than it was, because now my background is dark and rich.
Umuhle unjengelanga unjengenkanyeti.
So at this point, I think you should have some understanding how the shading goes. You just shade from the darkest and then you move to the lightest areas and try to fill that area as consistent as you possibly can. And the entire time I'm using a circular motion. Now if you look closely, you can see lines on the forehead. That's because at some point I was using the cross hatching method to make that area darker, and now that I've actually have the darkest medium at my arsenal, I'm just using it to get the correct tone, man. I'm not focused. I'm not really like a fanatic to the cross hatching method or anything. It works in some point, but for this case it's not what I was looking for. So right now I'm just shading everything and making everything as smooth and as consistent as I possibly can. The covered side is the part that I've already detailed. So the detailing is quite simple. I didn't want it to complicate it. I'm using dots to, now that I actually have the tone that I was looking for, I'm using dots look like skin pores. This is just the back eraser of your everyday HB pencil. So the technique that you can grasp with the dots is, when you are dotting lighter areas, you try to put more pressure so that the dots are visible, and when you're going to darker areas, you decrease the pressure that you put to the pencil so that the dots aren't as visible. So I was looking for the best tool between the eraser of the HB pencil and the Tombow mono eraser. And the Tombow mono eraser was really great in making the lines that I'm doing right now, while the HB pencil was really great in making the dots. So like I said, I'm making dots and lines, not confusing or complicating my detailing. I'm using dots. If it's not dots, it's lines. So I'm starting the pattern of the face, the pattern of the skin pores on the face really, and then just using the dots and lines to try to replicate that. And then this is a kneaded eraser. So on very light areas where I have to erase, I use a kneaded eraser over an eraser, because you can control how much the kneaded eraser needs to erase. And I also showed this part to like show you that I cut the Tombow eraser to achieve those small dots and lines. If you want to achieve the same thing, you can cut it. So how I made those hair, I couldn't get the whole footage. I remember recording it. I used you have your hard charcoal pencil, which breaks easily. I used it to make those hair. I just made dots, and then I came back with my brush and shaded to make that. Now I'm coming back with the Tombow eraser and the pencil eraser to make dots and lines, just to make it look like it's more stable hair which is growing. So my detailing is not that complicated. It's basically and mostly dots and lines. And so far I've just used erasers, the three erasers, just changing and finding the best eraser which works great to do a certain texture. So here I went back to adding more details on the face, which is lines and dots and lines and dots and lines and dots. I think as much as you can get makes the drawing as realistic. The more you get those small details, the more realistic the drawing looks. It's very important to make your details very, very small and subtle, so that it doesn't overshadow the whole drawing, because you have to remember, which is more important, it's the skin tone being the correct skin tone, and then the details, they have to be small, visible, but not overshadowing the skin tone of the face.
When usmatha unibuka kutsi phasha uyenza.
So after all the dots and lines, I then come back with an HB pencil Next to, depending on where the light hits, but next to every line and dot, I make the similar thing, lines and dots, lines and dots. And even at this point, the more you are able to get these lines and dots, it's the more realistic the drawing is going to be. And if you feel like you're losing the control, you could use a 2H. You can interchange between the two. You can use the HB pencil or the 2H pencil. So here I'm using the hardest charcoal pencil. There are some dots which looked very dark-ish, so I just needed the darkest, hardest pencil that I could get, which is the hardest charcoal pencil. And then coming down to the lower part of the face just to finish everything else, and you would see this part as like the summary of everything that I've done on the upper part of the face, just a summary of how to draw a face. First, you start by getting your tonal values correctly by shading your dark from your darkest areas to your lightest areas. It's easier to feel the lightest areas when you've already shaded the darker areas. And then I use the biggest brush to like shade and get a uniform and consistent tone. And then after the tone, I come back with my in-kneaded eraser to bring up the parts of the face which are more into light, because with an in-kneaded eraser you can knead it to anything that you want and it's so easy to control. And most of the time when I shade, I use dots. I don't know, it's so easy to control the areas which you are shading when you're using dots than if you were using lines, because if you are using a line you were just going to make one solid line which is going to ruin everything. And also with the dots, I feel like they also give you a feel like you're already starting to make the details of the face. The lower lip was the lightest part on this drawing, and that's why it's the last part that I shade. And then after all that, I come back to making the details. I'm using dots, just making your random dots, basically setting the pattern of the face, making as many dots as you can get with the eraser, which is doing the trick for you. This time around it was this Tombow eraser, and then changing it with the HP eraser and then the Tombow eraser. It's the same concept. When you go into darker areas, you try to decrease the pressure that you put on your eraser, and then on lighter areas you increase the pressure. And then here I was making the beard. These out. I was using a pencil eraser. I was making curves really. This is the least visible hair, I would say, because on top of this I'm going to use a white charcoal pencil to make those more on light, like strings of hair. Even on this part of the face it's dots, but however on this drawing it was lines. That's why I made those lines. I did them the similar way I've been using the entire time. Whenever I'll be drawing teeth, I always use a blending stamp because a blending stamp is very soft than using the pencil directly. And then I'm going to shade with a brush, and then from the brush I'm going to detail. Nothing complicated really. And most can make the mistake of assuming that the teeth should be white, but when you leave them white and not shading them, they're going to look flat. So you should shade them so that you are able to make those details that I'm doing right now, to give them the look that they are shiny, like light is hitting them a certain way, and they are watery.
When usmatha ungibuka kutsi phasha uyenza futfuma leswinjawo. When usmatha ungibuka kutsi phasha uyenza futfuma leswinjawo. When usmatha mangibuka kutsi phasha uyenza
And then the rest of the details, it's mostly lines with my pencil eraser. And that marks the end of this tutorial. I hope you found this very informative. If you have questions, you can write them below. I'm going to be delighted to answer each and every question that you have. And I'll be making more tutorials. I'm currently working on a big Alicia Keys drawing, which is really detailed. And I'm really looking forward to uploading that and making tutorials. So I will try to make more of these tutorials. Thank you for watching. Belele Jeffrey Lamini signing out.